Hello and welcome to this F-Secure webcast. Today we have a very good lineup for you guys. We're going to be talking about ransomware, but we're going to be covering it from a couple of different angles. We're going to have Christine talking about the threat landscape in general. We're going to have Laura talking about what the attack phishing campaigns look like, what the attack looks like from an attacker point of view, and then we're going to be having Mikko bringing in his very own special flavor of magic to the proceedings. We're going to have some time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions you would like to ask the presenters, please ask them in the chat window, and we'll take those questions at the end of all presentations. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Christine Bejerasco, who leads the unit that actually monitors the threat landscape for F-Secure. Christine.
Thank you, Janne. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us to the webinar today. Now, phishing as a threat, it almost needs no introduction. Because even almost 2 decades ago when I started in the cybersecurity industry, phishing was already there. But during that time, phishing was a URL in an email body, and when you click on it, it gives you a website. Maybe it tries to copy the banking site, but it doesn't really look too much like the banking site. But today, these phishing sites are a bit different. And in the next few slides, I'm going to have 3 different polls where your task, should you accept it, is to identify which one is the phishing site. You have 10 seconds for each poll. Are you ready? Let's begin. So firstly, you have here a screenshot from a legitimate Amazon site and a phishing Amazon site. You have 10 seconds to identify which one is the phishing page. All right, that concludes our time. The next one, we have Facebook phishing of a certain language, as well as a screenshot from the legitimate Facebook site. Another 10 seconds to guess which one is the phishing page. All right, and finally, we have our third one, which is from the legitimate Santander banking site and from the phishing site. Another 10 seconds to guess which one is the phishing page. Okay, thank you for your participation. So we're going to check the answers later on towards the end of this presentation. But for now, back to our regular programming. So I was talking earlier that phishing around 2 decades ago, there were URLs in email bodies. But today, and starting a few years back, this has already become as well file attachments that contains URLs that are attached into emails. But for example, if you look at this page, you will see that these are the favored file types of the phishing threat actors. And there's one thing that they have in common. It's that they can work on different platforms. So they're platform agnostic. For example, looking at HTML, all you really need to load HTML is a browser. And then you have PDFs, which are portable by nature. And then you have Microsoft Office document file types, which can actually work in different platforms as long as you have the app that supports it. And then drilling deeper into PDFs, these are some of the examples that we have for phishing PDFs. And you can see that the URL that's hidden inside a PDF is actually not very much visible in the foreground. But there is also always something that quite attracts you to click on it. So for example, there's a document that has a blurred background. And then there's a button in front of it that if you click on it, supposedly you feel like it's going to expose the document. And then there's also a document that requires authentication, which is not uncommon even for legitimate PDF files. But why go to the trouble of putting the URL inside a file rather than just putting it in the email body itself? Well, if email as an infection vector has been around for more than 2 decades, then cybersecurity companies have already built protection mechanisms that will parse emails and look at the body. And if there's a malicious link in there, perhaps that email will not even be delivered to the recipient's inbox. So this adds an additional layer where the phishing link could potentially be delivered to the target. And then even if we are having phishing files and we are having phishing URLs, at the very end of the day, you will get a URL. And those can be classified into 4 different categories as to where they are hosted. The most popular one are the free hosting sites, and they have been gaining popularity in the past 3 years. And it's not unusual or it's not surprising to think like, why would they be using this? Why would the phishing threat actors be using this? Well, it's because, for one, it's free. And then secondly, it's very fast and very easy to host content here. So much so that even if your phishing site dies in a few hours, it didn't really cost the threat actor that much. And then secondly, there's also creating your own domain or registering your own domain, which is maybe a little bit better sometimes for the attackers because they don't need to inherit the reputation that the free hosting site may already have. And then also, there's also the usage of compromised websites, which are quite valuable, especially if the compromised websites have already been around for a long time. And they have been known to be safe, for example. But there is an extra layer of work that, well, the threat actor would need to do in order to work with this, because first they need to scan different servers out there and see which ones are vulnerable. They need to exploit that server, and then they need to host the phishing content there, which is a little bit more work. And in the past 3 years, the use in there has been decreasing as well. And then finally, we have dynamic DNS providers, which can also be used as subdomain hosting. And if we look a little bit at what are the top domains that are being used for free hosting, we can see that AppSpot, which is the Google Cloud engine, is being used as one of the top. And why is this happening? Well, firstly, AppSpot actually supports HTTPS. And if somebody checks the whois information or checks who is the owner of AppSpot, this is owned by Google, which adds an extra layer of legitimacy. And sometimes when people think about HTTPS, perhaps there's a little bit of thinking that this is more secure because HTTPS. But we'll check later why this is not the case. And then this is followed by a few more free hosting sites. Now, within this year alone, we have seen that more than 50% of phishing sites are now using HTTPS. And if we compare that to 8 years ago, where there's less than 20%, that's quite a big growth. So the adoption is already there. Now, if we think that HTTPS is the way to identify that something could be more safe as opposed to being malicious, then this actually disproves that point, because HTTPS, as some of you guys probably already know, is only encrypting the traffic to protect that in transit. And it doesn't really matter if the traffic or the information it's encrypting is safe or malicious. And what are these phishing threat actors actually phishing for? What are the sectors that they are actually phishing for? So firstly, the most popular sector is still financial sector. And this is surprising. But it's interesting, though, that in the past 3 years, the volume, the share of the financial sector is now becoming lesser and lesser. And what's taking its place is social networking. However, even though the financial sector in total volume has a bit of a lesser share of the pie, if you look at itself on its own, you will see that this is still also steadily growing in volumes. But social networking, it has quadrupled from 2019 to 2020. So there is really strong growth here. And there's also online and cloud services, which have almost doubled. But I would like to direct your attention to the last bar on this chart, which is the cryptocurrency sector, where this year, even though we're only halfway through the year, this has already doubled in volumes. Now, most likely, the phishing threat actors have been looking at the developments that are happening in the cryptocurrency sector. The fluctuations, the rise and fall of the valuations when it comes to cryptocurrency has apparently gained their interest. And of course, because this has gained the interest of different people globally, so they're riding on this wave as well. And then if we look at the top 3 different sectors, so first the financial sector. If you look at the top 5 banks here, there's one thing that these banks have in common. It's that they are mainly coming from countries who have English as a predominant language. And English is actually, I mean, as we all know, is a very accessible language. We're speaking English as of the moment. So this is also accessible, not just to everyone for legitimate uses, but also for cyber criminals. And looking at the top 3 banks here, which are all hosted in the US, these actually map as well to, according to FDIC, what are the top banks in the US when it comes to deposits. And then secondly, social networking. Facebook, it is the top of the list. And this is not surprising because your Facebook credentials, you don't only use that to log into Facebook, like the social networking site. You can use it as well to authenticate into other web services. And then finally, for online and cloud services, Office 365 is reflecting the adoption that these past few years has been happening in different organizations. So it's now becoming quite a lucrative credential theft. But all right, so I was talking about different brands, and when it comes to, let's say, somebody who wants to get into a life of cybercrime, I'm not recommending it, but in case somebody wants to get there, they might think like it's very hard to maintain these phishing sites because I have to maintain different brands and I have to write my own code and I have to write like almost perfect images so that I can post it out there and make it believable. But maybe that's not the case because there's something that what we call phishing kits. And the price could range between $25 US to more than $300 US, depending on how nicely made is that phishing kit. And for example, one thing that a budding cybercriminal may not think of is how to disallow your phishing site from being visited by Google or PhishTank, any of those scanners that may look for phishing sites and block them. So this is one of the code that the phishing kit can handle. And of course, they need to handle what are the different fields, what is the CSS, what are the images coming from the bank, they will handle that, as well as how do you retrieve the credentials and then send it over to the attacker. So for example, all that the attacker really needs to do, the buyer of the phishing kit, is to replace the email address here with their own email address. And then they have a drop account of the credentials. And the most favored webmail providers for drop accounts are found here. So Gmail is a crowd favorite. However, these 5 different providers of webmail can actually provide, well, different multiple email accounts that can be just disposable. You don't really need to write your real email or your real name into these webmail providers. And then after you have the credentials, of course, you can now start monetizing from it. And Privacy Affairs had this data last May where they tried to check how much does it cost for different credentials in the dark web when, well, the phishing threat actor is already selling it. So depending, of course, on how much is in there for your credit card or bank accounts, there's different values. And for social media, there's Gmail, which is the Google account, and Facebook, which are quite high on the list because these are the accounts, as mentioned earlier, that can be used for other web services. And then we have crypto accounts. So these are the accounts that are coming from the different websites that people can do cryptocurrency trading. And apparently they're valued quite highly at the moment. But with all of these different things that are happening in the phishing landscape, what are we to do? Before we go there, let's go back to the answers earlier from our poll. And let's see what you guys answered. So firstly, which one is the phishing page? We have a very cybersecurity savvy crowd. So 56% have mentioned the first screenshot. And this is correct. So there are some tells in this screenshot. So if you look at the bottom, you see the copyright information there. If you're somebody that works in the UX team from Amazon, you wouldn't be caught dead having this copyright information. It stops in 2017, and we are already in 2021. So that's already a tell. And then secondly, if you're used to shopping in Amazon, you would probably remember that they don't have their email and the password on the same screen anymore. So you need to put in your email or mobile phone number before you can put in your password in the next screen. So nicely done. Next one is the Polish Facebook site. So maybe this is a dead giveaway to our Polish speakers, but maybe also not so much. But this is really a very good crowd. So 60% have identified letter B as phishing. And to be honest, this is actually like a bit hard because the text is all the same, except for in letter A, if you can see that there's a shadow behind the white box. And well, this is part of the UI design that actually makes that box pop. And if you're part of the UX team, of course, it just looks quite nice, but maybe if there's not a lot of design bone in your body like me, then maybe you wouldn't notice the difference between a flat box in letter B and the one with the shadow in letter A. And then the final one, so for the Santander page, we have 58% still selecting the right one. Well done. So for this one, so there's only one difference, really, it's the button. So letter B, the button is active by default, and for letter A, it is deactivated. So there are websites, especially legitimate ones, that they validate first the content of the field before they will activate the login button. But very nicely done. So excellent observation. But all right, so what do we do when it comes to phishing pages? So firstly, let's try to remember, like, how do we really visit our banks? How do we visit Amazon? How do we use web services? If there is now a new method, like using this email or this message that you get, that is trying to let you, it's calling you to action, but it's not usually how you use this service, ignore it. Like, stick to the legitimate sources that you already know about. And then secondly, for authenticating the source, I haven't even discussed about spear phishing, which is the targeted phishing. And especially there, you need to verify with the sender if they were really sending, for example, the email address. And there are different ways of doing this, but don't reply to that mail because there may already be an attacker on the other end. So you can use SMS, you can call them, you can verify via instant messaging. And then we have an experience now of scrutinizing the content, so I gather that you guys will be very good at checking it. And I haven't even shown you the URLs of those content. So when the URLs come in, it will be even easier to check if this is actually the domain of your bank or not. And then finally, it doesn't help if there's only one or two people in the organization who actually knows about this. So it's best to conduct phishing awareness trainings in your organization, because if we invest anyway to cybersecurity products and services, shouldn't we consider our people as part of the attack surface? And shouldn't we consider them as entry points to an organization? And therefore, if they are, then we need to make them partners in elevating the security posture of our organizations. That's all we got for now. So I will give you back to Janne. Thank you for your time and for your participation.
Thank you, Christine, for that very insightful explanation about the threat landscape currently. And I'm going to hand it off to Laura Kankaala, who's going to put her consultant/hacker hat on and give us that attacker's point of view in what a phishing campaign looks like. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Janne, and thank you, Christine. First of all, I'm so happy to be presenting here today. And Christine already mentioned the word threat actor. So right now, what we're going to do is that we're going to go and take the threat actor hat on. So I will be talking about attackers' perspective, threat actors, and so on. But now let's think about how an attacker would look at the problem of phishing and how would they construct a phishing campaign. And first of all, it's good to remember that we are all part of this forefront or front lines of these phishing attacks all the time. And we are not just individuals when we are online, unfortunately. We are part of communities, we are part of organizations. And for example, here's an example of Mikko Hyppönen, who is going to be presenting next, who was just targeted with a phishing attack. And the aim here is to get into the places that you have access to, and the aim is to actually, not necessarily your information, but the accesses that you have like secondhand with your own accesses. And it's also good to remember that phishing is just one part of a bigger kill chain of attacks. So phishing is when you are still kind of outside of the organization or with very low privileges inside an organization, but you kind of want to break the surface and break the barrier and get really inside the accounts and really get inside the company's estate. And when that phishing is successful, what you're pulling out from there as the attacker or the threat actor, you're pulling out sensitive information or sensitive data, which could be credentials, for example, to different services, or it could be banking details and so on. Or then you can have backdoor access, for example, with malware, so you can re-break that surface and enter those private spaces again. So in order to understand how these phishing attacks work, we really need to look at the lore and how the lore is constructed, because this is the one thing that gets us and the one thing that is out there to get us. So I would, from my own experience, I would summarize a good lore in this manner. So it needs to be relatable. So you need to have something that the target will relate to. And then you need to have a clear call to action. And this call to action basically means that you need to specify what that target needs to do. So do they need to download something? Do they need to go somewhere and log in? You need to be very clear on what they need to do. And then last, I say this a little bit sarcastically, but the user experience needs to be good. So if the website or the email, if it looks clunky, if it's not nice to read, it will drive off people, it will drive off traction. So we really need to think of all these three aspects when we're constructing a phishing campaign. And I already mentioned this before, but just to clarify that when we're phishing someone, even though the target is a human being in that organization, the target typically is the organization and the assets that the organization has. But unfortunately, the aim is pointed at the people working at the company. And as an attacker, we need to start to deconstruct the organization in our head. So if it's a tech company, we know there's probably a CEO in there. We know there's a tech department, we know there are sales, there are HR, so we kind of already know the subsets of people that are there. And we can kind of already understand that what kind of emails they're dealing with, what kind of stuff they're already seeing in their day-to-day life. For example, HR, they're seeing a lot of CVs coming in, sales are probably seeing a lot of I don't know, Janne is in sales, Janne can tell later on. Yeah. And then tech department, perhaps tickets and so on. So we really need to know who we are talking to in that organization. And let's say that we want to target sales, but we want our attack to be targeted at sales, but something we can potentially scale up later and target at other people as well. So when we have deconstructed the organization in our head, so we already know the departments in this organization. So where do we then look at the people who are actually working in that organization? Well, social media is a really good place to start because of the wealth of information that people give voluntarily online, and especially LinkedIn, because in LinkedIn, not only we can find individual people quite easily, but we can also automatically scrape a lot of data in there. So we can basically get a full phone book for the organization in there. And know who is working and in what roles, and then move from there. And then secondly, what I would do is that I would try to identify the technologies that the company is using. So especially when it comes to cloud-based or software as a service technology. So are they using some places to collaborate? Are they using some online like webmails or Outlook and such things like this? And once we narrow down the technologies that they're using, we can already start to imagine the things that we can target them with. And by the way, you can also use a lot of these tools by default to do these kinds of attacks, but for the sake of shedding some light into the way these things are done, I will go to the not using any of these, but kind of like starting from the scratch. So let's say we identified that Heidi, who we saw in this slide, this one, Heidi, who works at company X, we have now identified that their company is using Office 365 because they have their own login page available online for that. So we already know quite a big chunk of the potential technology they're using with the Office 365 suite. So we can basically already take this one and start building from here. And first thing we want to do is that we want to register a domain name. Now again, Christine also mentioned that we can use pre-existing places to host our website on, and that may provide some benefits when it comes to reputation. But when we register our custom domain, we have a lot more flexibility into making it believable. For example, company X, my company X, or security company X. There's plenty of opportunities out there, and then depending on your budget, you may end up with a good or a bad domain name. And this is typically the part that I spend most of my time with. And then when it comes to user experience, once we have our website set up, and whether it's a credential harvester or any kind of website, it needs to have HTTPS. And this is also now looking at from the Defender point of view, or if you're just browsing online, it's really crucial to understand that getting HTTPS or certifications to provide this encryption layer on the traffic is super easy these days. And this is something that I would always do just to avoid detection and basically provide for a better user experience again, because the user wouldn't have to see these errors popping up and warning them about insecure connections and so on. So this is really something that is crucial for successful phishing. Then the lure, the visible lure to the target. I would write an email to the target that is something that, well, again, based on the technology they're using, but something that they kind of find similar, something that they're used to seeing. So for example, this Microsoft account, it has the kind of outlook or the look and feel of the Microsoft account. But in here, and it also has Heidi's name in there, so it feels personal already. Then it has a clear action and clear that something has happened, something that makes Heidi potentially a little bit upset. And then there's a clear call to action, what Heidi needs to do. And if we look at the source, then we will see that there's the phishing site that we registered that is actually behind this link. And I think this checks all the boxes for relatability, because once again, it's something that Heidi's used to seeing, and clear call to action and good user experience, because when they go to the website, it will be over HTTPS. And also, if you look at this email, it shouldn't, I hope it doesn't have any spelling mistakes, but it needs to be also clear language that they understand and know how to interact with. And then what happens next? The possibilities are quite vast. So we could, for example, harvest credentials from Heidi. We could expand this campaign to be wider, so that instead of targeting Heidi, we could target a larger subset of people, or we could point her towards a link where she needs to download something and then take it from there. So this is, once again, just the basically first step of gaining access into a company's system. And that's why it's really crucial to understand that attackers, they always want you to act when it comes to phishing attacks. It's always that you need to click something, you need to reply to something, you need to install something. And we all do mistakes, that's granted. But it's the kind of like the first thought is perhaps to make the mistake, but it's the second thought and the second action that we take that really matters. We can report the email forward. We can install defenses that protect our internal networks. And we can do a lot of things so that instead of relying only on preventing the mistakes, which is also a good start, we need to look at the problem more holistically. And that's it from my side.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
So as you point out, business email compromise is often the result of a phishing attack. And here to talk us through that phenomenon is the man who needs no introduction, our cyber ambassador to the world, Mikko Hyppönen.
Thank you, Janne. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Business email compromise is an old problem which has become bigger and bigger throughout the years. When we look at the international statistics coming out from insurance companies, especially those which issue cyber insurance, the numbers don't lie. There's bigger loss of money from business email compromise attacks than from ransomware, which sounds incredible because we know ransomware is such a huge problem. But business email compromise targets large enterprise-sized companies, and often the target is to steal millions at the time. This is why the losses out of these problems are so huge. And this problem really isn't new. Like, some of us will remember that already in the 1990s, companies were being targeted with very similar attacks. Someone was posing as an outsider or as an insider, trying to get the financial people within the company to wire out money to places where it's not supposed to be going. In the 1990s, these were done over faxes. So during the quiet summer months, companies would be receiving fake bills being faxed in from companies which didn't exist, hoping that the summer interns in the financial department would fall for these and just pay all the bills they see. What we're seeing today is basically the same idea, but they have great twists. We have to understand that the game has thoroughly changed because now everything is on our computers, and the attackers today quite often don't just try to shoot from the outside. They first gain access internally and spend time understanding how business works from within before they start putting in fake orders or fake accounts or changing account numbers. And whenever these cases are in the headlines, a very typical reaction from people is to chuckle about it, to laugh about it, like, what an idiot, like, how stupid do you have to be to fall for such a scam? Or what an idiot, sending companies money to an outside place and falling for some Nigerian scam operation. How stupid do you have to be? This is wrong. It's always wrong to laugh at the victims of crimes, but here it's especially bad because these are not so obvious to spot at all. I was speaking with the CFO last year. Well, not last year, the year before pandemic, 2 years ago. A CFO for a real estate company in the United Kingdom. They had been hit with a business email compromise attack. And the background here is that the real estate company in question is a fairly large company working in a large city in the United Kingdom with a long history. And in the particular city where they are headquartered, there's 2 old real estate companies. Big one, the one where the CFO works at, and then an even older one, a small one. The CEOs of the big and small real estate companies knew each other. They were friends. They had known each other for years and years. And the old guy started to speak about retiring. So they got into discussion about that maybe the big company should acquire the small real estate company and the old boss would retire. All right, sounds like a plan. They start negotiations, they bring in the lawyers, and they start working on a contract. They polish the details of the contract over email until everybody's happy. And then when everybody's happy, the CEO of the big company sends the crucial email. We are ready to sign. We're ready to sign this now. Everything is ready, and we're ready to pay you the down payment. Please send your payment information over. This was the crucial email. This was the email which was never received by the staff at the smaller company. Instead, this message was intercepted and replied by attackers who had been sitting in the Office 365 installation of the smaller company for weeks, reading everything, following the negotiations about the contract, staying silent, just waiting for the right moment. And here's the right moment. They replied back from the account of the CEO of the smaller company, thanking them for all this hard work on honing the contract to the end, and here's the payment information. CEO of the larger company prints out this email, brings it to his CFO, the guy who I was speaking with, and tells him that, okay, we're ready to go, please pay the down payment money right now. And the CFO even asks the CEO that, are you sure this is the right account? And the CEO says that, yes, I'm sure, you can pay it. Who was being an idiot here? Who made a stupid mistake? Well, nobody. This is a highly advanced attack which will fool pretty much anyone unless they've been told exactly how business email compromise attacks work today. If you understand that the attacker can be sitting in the network, reading all communication, learning how things work, and then modifying key parts of the communication, if you don't know that, you will fall for these scams. These companies knew each other. The bosses knew each other. There was a real business transaction here. They really wanted to move real money. The only mistake happened because the attacker had access to all of this information, and the attacker was patient enough to wait for the right moment. If the attacker is patient and waits for the right moment, they can do pretty much anything. Another example is when we were hit. F-Secure has been targeted with a business email compromise. Granted, this was a couple of years ago, but it's a great example on how any kind of company, including a security company, can be targeted with financial attackers. And there's a clever detail on how we were targeted. F-Secure has offices in 29 countries. If someone tries to pose as our CEO and sends an email to our CFO asking him to pay some money somewhere, most likely the CFO would just walk over to the CEO's office and ask what's going on. So the attacker did not target anybody in our headquarters. They targeted an accountant in our Asian headquarters, which are in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. In particular, one of the clerks in Kuala Lumpur receives a text message from our CEO saying that, "Hi, are you available? I will call you in 5 minutes." And you can imagine that pretty much any clerk in Asian side office will be available for the call coming in from the headquarters from the CEO. 5 minutes later, the phone rings. It's our CEO, which of course wasn't our CEO, but close enough, sounded close enough. A foreigner calls in. The phone call starts with the phrase that, "Are you alone? Can you speak? Great. I'm putting you on our insider list effective immediately. Do you understand? Yes or no?" And this is pretty clever. Like, we are a public company listed in stock exchange. We have insider lists, which are a legal instrument, which forces employees not to share information they know about with anyone else. If they do, they break the law. So putting someone on an insider list, first of all, as a restrictive mechanism to prevent him or her from asking for guidance or asking for help from others, that's pretty clever. Even better, it makes people feel important. Imagine this accountant coming out of the meeting and everyone else who knew that she's going to have a phone call from the CEO asking her, like, "Hey, what did the CEO want? What was this about?" And her answer will be that, "Unfortunately, I can't tell you what it's about. It's a secret." Which sort of ties the victim into the scam, because now you're important. You're the one who's trusted with secrets. You have been put on an insider list. Well, our accountant in the office did not fall for this, because we had identified the key employees in our organization who have the right to move money, who have the right to make payments. Instead, he recorded the phone call, and she never fell for the scam. But you can see how these tricks are more advanced than we typically give them credit for. And you see, users can be fooled in many different ways. When users are surprised or maybe scared or maybe tricked in some other way, when they don't expect something to happen, they can be fooled with basic psychological tricks. We've seen this over and over again. Surprise the user with something, and user is confused and will do what you ask him to do. Click on the link, follow the link and give the credentials, open the attachment. And the amount of money which is being made with these attackers it's hard to measure, but we know it's huge. We have a video about this. Let's actually play this video. This is Mr. Raymond Abbas. The video is from Raymond Abbas' Instagram feed. This is Raymond shopping. We believe this was shot in Monaco. He's just about to leave the shop with his car, which seems to be a Rolls-Royce, as the staff is loading his car with his shopping goods. Apparently today it was time to shop at Gucci. Raymond Abbas has been tied to multiple business email compromise attacks in different countries, and clearly crime pays. But we also have good news. Because in addition of crime paying in forms of Rolls Royces, sometimes crime also pays.
6 raids were carried out
like
simultaneously while the suspects were sleeping in their Dubai residences.
This is footage from United Arab Emirates from Operation Fox Hunt 2, in which law enforcement officials from Dubai law enforcement arrested Mr. Raymond Abbas. This was pretty much exactly a year ago. Since then, Raymond has been extradited from Dubai to the United States. His next date in court will be next month. The amount of money that went through hands of Mr. Abbas and his colleagues isn't exactly known, but when we look at, for example, the Bitcoin wallet, which is tied to Mr. Raymond Abbas, there's 3,798 Bitcoins in this one wallet. We're speaking about massive amounts of money. And when companies try to defend themselves, when I earlier spoke about how it's not right to chuckle or laugh at the victims, I think a really good example on how hard this challenge is look at two companies we all know, Facebook and Google. Facebook and Google are prime examples of companies which spend a lot of time and a lot of money in defending their own infrastructure. These are prime targets for attackers of all kinds. Sure, their own data center infrastructure and the data they host is being targeted, but they're also being targeted with business email compromise, because these are billion-sized companies and very good targets for financially motivated attackers. And both Facebook and Google fell for business email compromises. In fact, they both fell attacks launched by the same guy. This guy right here. This is Mr. Evaldas Rimasaukas from Lithuania. He was orchestrating scams with business email compromise attacks in which Facebook wired 99 million and Google wired 23 million to accounts controlled by Evaldas. That's pretty remarkable, not just because of the size of the scams, but also that this is Facebook and this is Google. If companies which invest so much time and money into their own security fall for one guy from Lithuania, I think it's a great example on how this problem isn't as easy as we often think. And then we have the future of business email compromises. We've been fighting this problem for years and years. Future will be worse. I think we've only seen the very beginning of these problems. However, some of the cases might be forecasting things that are happening already which really aren't happening yet. And here I'm talking about deepfake attacks. Now, deepfake technology, we all know what it looks like, where you can change faces or change voices or do other similar attacks. Obviously, attackers who have access to deepfake technology could use this to launch very credible business email compromise attacks where you would portray yourself to be a real executive or real CFO or board member or CEO of a large company. In fact, there's been news about this already. But none of these have actually ever been proven. Sure, we do have technology which allows us to do deepfake voice or do deepfake phone calls. We have technology available today which you can use to change your voice. So for example, there's technology which will change my voice to a female voice in real time, which really are being used in social engineering attacks. But we also have to remember that having real-time access to a deepfake voice changer which would look like, or no, sound like a real person, even though it's doable, it's really a pretty tough thing to do. It most likely is much easier to just get a guy who sounds like someone or can fake the voice of someone instead of using real deepfake technology. And then we have the problem that victims themselves might easily come up with stories that, I didn't really fall for a business email compromise scam. No, I'm clever. I wouldn't fall for those. Instead, this was a completely novel, new kind of an attack which would have fooled anybody because this was deepfake. Sort of like an excuse. Now, what I'm saying is that deepfake is doable, but we haven't seen any evidence that it would have already been done. I'm sure it will be done soon enough as this technology becomes more accessible. When any idiot can do this, then yes, we will start seeing these being used in large scale in crime as well. So, what do we do? Well, it really is about the processes. It really is about figuring out how your organization works. What actually is the process of money flow in your organization? Where do the bills come in? Who approves them? Who pays them? Or what kind of hardware do they use to pay them? Do they use the same computers for anything else, or are they just used for paying bills? Are these users trained? Have you identified everybody in your organization who can actually move money for you? Have you trained every one of them? Have you told them how modern business email compromise attacks work? And then you can do things like making sure that outsiders can't send email from the outside your internal email using your own domain name. Sounds pretty easy and pretty obvious. This is surprisingly hard to do because every single one of you uses outsiders like outside mailing lists or outside marketing companies which use your domain to send emails. It's a surprisingly hard problem to solve. And then make it obvious for your employees to double check, am I really on an insider list or am I not? Make it obvious how you can reach the top management through alternative means whenever one of your employees wants to confirm that this email, this text message or this WhatsApp I got from you is really from you. That's all from me. Now, thank you very much, and it's back to Janne.
Thank you, Mikko. And could I please ask the other speakers to join Mikko on stage for some questions and hopefully some answers as well. The first question we had is very topical today. Mikko, about the Anom takedown, the sting operation Trojan Shield. What can you tell us about that today?
Yeah, that's very timely. Indeed, today we've seen a massively large takedown from law enforcement from around the world. One of the biggest we have ever seen. This affects, I think, 16 or 17 countries. Hundreds of people, hundreds of criminals or suspected criminals have been arrested, mostly yesterday, all over the world, including suspects right here in Finland, in Tuusula. All this goes back to an encrypted chat application, mobile Android-based application, which was actually being actively read by law enforcement in Australia and in the United States and Europol as part of the cooperation. And we've seen similar sting operations before, most recently the Sky ECC and the EncroChat operations, but those were different because those were real criminal chat applications created by criminals for criminals, which were then intercepted by law enforcement. This case, the Anom case, this is a chat app created from the ground up by the police. So it is a sting operation at its very definition. Very unusual case and seems to be very, very important results. As one anecdote, the Swedish officials said that they've been able to prevent 8 murders based on the information they got from this chat app.
It's impressive. Staying on the topic of criminals, Christine, one of our viewers noticed that looks like the prices of these darknet services are increasing. Do we know why that is?
Well, of course, we don't really have the mind of the cyber criminals like in here. But for example, if we look about the cryptocurrency market at the moment, during the start of the year, we have seen cryptocurrency valuations actually skyrocketing. And although it's a little bit lower now, if we compare from the past few years, the values of cryptocurrencies have been rising. So the darknet pricing is definitely dependent on how much the market, which means like the people out there, actually perceive the value of this as well. So if cryptocurrency valuation is high, then therefore the pricing of these credentials are essentially higher as well.
So everything's getting more expensive anyway. Well, on that topic, Laura, I'm a lazy person. I can't be bothered to look for all that information to create a convincing phishing site. Are there like turnkey services? Can I just buy like a materials pack from someplace and just use that to launch my phishing campaign?
Of course, and as I said also before, you can use a lot of readily available services to launch these things. And if you just go to certain marketplaces in certain Tor network, you can find already people selling services around this topic. So if there's a specific thing that you don't want to do yourself, then there's probably someone offering a service for that as well. So depending on the willingness of spending some money or cryptocurrency, and then how tech savvy you are, then there's a lot of like mix and match combinations on what you can do.
Sounds awesome. All right, so a lot of this phishing happens on my browser, so you'd think the browser manufacturers could do something about that. Is there anything that Chrome or Firefox are doing to fight this problem?
Yeah, I can take it.
Sure.
Sure they are. I mean, there are different protection mechanisms that are built into the browsers already. So I've shown you a screenshot earlier of a phishing kit, which actually tries to avoid certain IP address ranges. And some of the ranges there belong, for example, to Google, which can be used like behind Google Chrome when it comes to protection mechanism that they have for Google, so that, for example, if you visit a phishing website coming from Chrome, then if they know about it, if Google knows about it already, then you can be protected from those. So definitely the browser manufacturers are also trying to improve their capability to detect these phishing sites.
Yeah. And a good point about how quickly these blacklists in these browser blocking lists are updated is the attack that Laura showed. I got that email on Friday. That was a targeted attack against me. We checked in our labs. We had never seen that before. It was hosted on a self-sustaining server, which was already blacklisted. And we can't find a single case where anybody would have used that in any other attack, in any of our references, but Google already had blacklisted that particular domain name, which only seemed to be hosting a phishing site against me. So that's pretty good example on how fast they can be.
Absolutely. What about things like MFA? How much will that stop these attackers?
With MFA, I would say it increases the attack complexity quite significantly, but I wouldn't. I'm going to say that always enable MFA wherever you can, but there are cases, and for example, I have demonstrated in public TV as well how to bypass some of these mechanisms, but there are ways of gaining the access tokens. But on the other hand, it's always not necessarily in the interest of the criminal to bypass the MFA, and there's basically two reasons. There may be other ways of obtaining sensitive information when it comes to just accessing, for example, some specific cloud services, so you can get basically information on the other people that are using that specific cloud service. Or then secondly, if you just know the password of this person for this one specific service, the chances are that it could be that he or she's using the same password in somewhere, like in some other service. So it's sometimes enough just to know the password and not get MFA access.
And regarding MFAs in general, I think it's always good to emphasize that if the user has an option of either using an MFA or multi-factor authentication system based on an authenticator app or text message, the app is a better choice because text messages can be spoofed. Am I right, Laura?
Yes, you're absolutely correct, and and the thing is that with not only spoofed, but for phishing attacks, you can more easily spoof the sender address or the number of the sender, so it can come with your smartphone very conveniently under the previous messages sent by, let's say, Microsoft or Facebook. So it will look more real, and if it has a link, for example, okay, click here and place the token you got before here in this link, then it's possible that people would fall for that because it seems more legitimate.
Yeah, that's devious. All right, one of our viewers was wondering about how working long hours and the stress from your work might expose you to this phishing attack risk, and was wondering if that's maybe a labor rights question somewhere down the line, sort of employees working on a right to disconnect after their working hours. Sort of how do companies protect their employees from phishing attacks? Is it even on the companies to protect their employees?
I can take this question. So, of course, like when it comes to companies nowadays, it would be good to emphasize that when you're uncertain of something, when your spidey senses are tingling, that's something that maybe you shouldn't answer right now when, let's say, your willpower is quite low after a long day at work. But phishing awareness trainings, actually, they are quite good at trying to train our employees on how to understand like these different strategies that Laura was also mentioning earlier, like this call to action, the sense of urgency, that typically what are these, especially spear phishing email campaigns doing. So if somebody is trained over and over again with different types of campaigns and they are exposed to this on a day-to-day basis, then it makes it easier for them to spot that, hey, maybe this is something that is quite suspicious now. Maybe this is something that I don't need to address, or maybe this is something that I should wait until tomorrow so that I can figure out like what is this really about when I have like fresher mind to handle it.
Yeah, and I think one more thing added to the trainings is that it's really important for the companies to also support secure practices, for example, by allowing or buying basically your employees password managers and supporting these like secure ways of accessing the services so that you are not kind of just focusing only on the training, but also helping people to do the right thing and to do better.
And sometimes users fail because they don't want to feel embarrassed. What I mean by this is that imagine getting an email from a big client, an important client sends you an email and it's a little bit weird, like you weren't expecting it, there's an attachment and you're not sure if this is real or if this is an attack. But then you think you might feel like an idiot if you like get back to the important client saying, hey, is this a real mail or is this not real? And it is real. And then you are like, why are you asking stupid questions? A good way of bypassing this problem and doing it securely is that when you get a little bit weird email and you want to confirm it's real, don't reply because the reply might go back to the attacker. Instead, use another channel like WhatsApp or text message, text back to the client, hi, I got your email that you just sent, I will get back to you tomorrow, I will get back to you later today, something like that. The end result is that the real contact at the big company will get your message and well, if it's a real message, they're just happy. Okay, thanks very much for getting back to me right away. And if it's not real, then they're like, okay, I haven't sent you anything. And now you just got full points for detecting an attack. It's a win-win.
Perfect. There was one question here, and I know I'm going to get some heat from our PR people because I've promised not to sell anything on these shows, but I swear this was a real viewer question was, when is F-Secure going to come up with a product that helps us against business email compromise? When can I train myself against phishing attacks with F-Secure products? And the answer, my friends, is right now that service exists. It's called Phished. You'll find more information on our website. But with that, I want to thank everyone for attending. I want to thank our speakers today. And that's all we had today. Thank you very much.